This is basically a final step after a decision that you made unanimously last year to ban Huawei and ZTE from getting federal funds that were meant to expand network capabilities across the United States. How critical a step is this now today, in your view?
This is really important because national security and network security now go hand in hand. So the FCC has said that these companies that are a big part of the worldwide equipment market, well, we're not going to pay with federal dollars to use that equipment in the United States. And today's decision makes that final and makes that clear.
Now, Huawei and ZTE have unanimously denied that they're threats to U.S. national security. What is the evidence that you have seen that makes you believe they are?
Well, our evidentiary record is real strong here, and it is consistent with findings from the executive branch and also from Congress. These are companies with deep ties to the Chinese government. And also these are companies with obligations under Chinese national security laws to make sure that they share intelligence with the government when asked. So we don't want to have their equipment in our nation's communications networks.
So in that case, do you think that today's decision goes far enough?
Well, today's decision is really only part of the puzzle. We really want to make sure that our nation's networks, especially as we get to the 5G era, are truly secure. So the first step is to make sure that this kind of equipment is not in our networks going forward. We're also, to the extent that it's in our networks now, going to have to take some of it out and replace it. And then finally, we're going to have to work on methods to make a more competitive and diverse equipment market for communications in the future so that we don't tend to rely on these companies that we think pose a security threat.
Now, this is at a time when we are sheltering in place, quarantining, working from home. We need our networks now more than ever. But you've got small rural carriers out there who are saying that this is going to handicap them because they can't get relatively cheaper equipment from Huawei and ZTE that they need to keep their networks up and running. What's your response to that?
Well, getting networks deployed everywhere in this country is really important. It's how we're going to solve the digital divide. And small and rural carriers have sought to use this equipment in the past because it's less expensive. But I think there's a big price for national security going forward. So we've got to figure out how to stop having them use it and also how to give them funds to help them replace this equipment to the extent it's in their networks today. That's a long-term smart investment in our nation's security, and it's time to make it.
Now, speaking of this, you're working towards the O-RAN approach, which would involve you using some sort of standardized hardware across the network. Can you explain what O-RAN is and how that would solve the Huawei or ZTE problem?
Sure. We only have a handful of equipment manufacturers for communications networks right now globally. So what we want to do is create a much more diverse and competitive market. That'll have lower costs. It'll be more innovation. And one of the best ways to do that is to virtualize part of these wireless networks, specifically the radio access network between the network's core and your device. And if we can bring more software into that system, we're going to have more companies enter that marketplace. It'll become more diverse and over time more secure. And also by focusing on software, well, we'll be focusing on something that the United States has traditionally led in. So it's a big new initiative that's getting a burst in Washington and with our telecom companies nationwide. And so I think it's important that we invest in that going forward. It's going to be a big part of our national security and our network security in the future.
Meantime, a few weeks have passed since you and I discussed the president's executive order on social media, and a lot has happened in the news. You've got Facebook under pressure for not moderating more posts by President Trump, again, threatening force against the American people. You've got a massive boycott now facing Facebook. That said, now that some time has passed, I'm curious where your thoughts are on what should happen to Section 230 and whether anything will happen to Section 230 as far as the FCC is concerned.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think there will be efforts in Congress to revisit that law. And I remain convinced that having the Federal Communications Commission rewrite that law or turn into the president's speech police is definitely not the answer. I mean, social media is frustrating, but what we need right now is Congress stepping in and assessing this law. It's definitely not the Federal Communications Commission's job to protect the president from information online.
That said, some people say that companies like Facebook are so vast that they are more like public utilities. And when a post like that comes from President Trump, there are critics who believe that some kind of action is necessary. Whose responsibility should and could that be?
Sure, that's absolutely a discussion, and we need to have it. But the way that laws get written is Congress writes the law. An executive order can't have the FCC rewrite Section 230, and it can't have the FCC rewrite the First Amendment. And so that's where I think the executive order fails. And what I think that means now is that Congress will have to assess this law and determine how viable it is going forward and what adjustments it might want to make. But that's, again, Congress and not the FCC's job.
All right. Meantime, we know you're not on President Trump's side of the aisle. We've got a huge election coming up. And I'm curious what policy changes you'd imagine a Biden administration bringing to technology and the FCC.
Well, I think first and foremost, we want to close our nation's digital divide, and then we want to lead the world with 5G deployment. I think if we do those two things, we are going to be in a good place in terms of digital opportunity and economic opportunity for all. So no matter what happens come fall, I think those are things that we want to focus on in the future.
Any likely choices for an FCC chair in a Biden administration?
Well, that's above my pay grade, so I'm going to pass on that one.